Welcome back to the Welcome to My Tent podcast, everyone. I am so excited to have Jera Bean here, Austin resident, social media strategist, video and content creation guru, authenticity lover, which we appreciate around here, and an all around wonderful human being. So, welcome into the tent, Jera.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you. I am
I,
so happy to be here today.
oh my gosh. Well, first off, I have been following Jera for quite some time, and we'll get into this because one of the things I find most fascinating about you is your evolution of you've been on the internet for a while.
I have. I have since, well, if we're talking like an evolution of where I am currently,
Yeah,
2015 is when it all began.
right. Which is wild to think about. I like cringe looking back at we can talk about cringy content too. Looking back on just how far we have come. But if we can start there, because you originally started in the fitness and health space because you were teaching at Soul Cycle. So what did the initial origins of Jerabine look like?
Ooh. So it all began April 4th, 2015. I actually remember the date because it's so significant. And that was the day that I started a workout program. So this is actually like pre-Soul Cycle because at the time I wasn't into fitness, but I decided to download BBG, Bikini Workout Guide by Kayla Itsinas. I'd been
Yeah.
following her for about a year or so. I saw the transformations and the community that was surrounding that program, and I really needed some positivity in my life at the time. I needed a change. This was a period where I was struggling with social anxiety. I was manipulated at this job, at this startup I was at, where my hair was starting to fall out. I like saw a little bald patch one day at a WeWork.
Oh my God. At a WeWork, you're
At
like,
a WeWork. We love it. And so that kind of sets the tone as to where I was at. So I downloaded this program, went to the gym, and created a Instagram account, which was originally Workout Bean. I'm currently Jera Bean, so things have shifted since then. But I wanted to hold myself accountable, and I started to post. And what happened was really beautiful. I instantly found this community of women online and felt very connected and motivated by them. I made like my first Insta friends. And I started to work out, which of course just feels good for your body and your mind and soul. And also, coupled with this, of course, is social media. So I found this creative outlet. I'm a very creative person. I was a
yeah,
fine art major.
you were in graphic work and you've always been in a creative creation
Exactly.
type of position. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I've always I mean, I'm not a writer, but writing has been one of my stronger skills as well, and so at the time, it's photos and captions, and I was able to express myself in that way. So that's how it all began, and quickly after that, or during that rather, fitness became this huge force in my life where I got my personal training certification, I became a Soul Cycle instructor, which is like a whole other story. I became an
Yeah.
Adidas ambassador. So yeah, that's really how social media began for me.
Yeah. And I think what still translates so much for you too is you've always stayed very true to yourself. And this is what I appreciate in the way that you teach. I have been so honored to be part of some of the courses. I was in the saloon, you have
Yes.
the way that you work still comes across as so authentic. And
Thank
the
you.
way that you're working now, of course, it's still one of your pillars. It's
Yeah.
still hard work, authenticity, and I wrote it down, Sarah. What was the other one?
Oh, I don't
Humor.
even remember sharing these.
Humor. Well, it's on your
Oh,
website. I stalk you. I stalk
oh,
before.
perfect. I mean, those sound like me. So
There it
perfect.
is. That's the best. But I think the authenticity piece is really, really huge. And it ties really into what you do today. Because now that you've pivoted into more of a social creator, content creator, working with others that are looking to build their presence in this sense, that still holds true. So when did you decide to make the pivot and make this brand shift? Because along with that comes a lot of life and a lot of things and a lot of shifts. So when
Yes.
did that pivot start and what did that transition period look like for you?
So this is like all over almost a decade because if we think I
Mhm.
started in 2015, so it's been about 9.5 years. So there's been a lot of change and pivots as we all have over a decade. Mine have just been very public on social
Yeah.
media. So So it all started, as I described, in the world of fitness. And then mid 2018, I actually left the fitness world. I left Soul Cycle. And that was a really big pivoting point because fitness is really what defined me, both as a human at that time, as well as my presence on social media. And so from about mid 2018 towards the end of 2019, looking back now, I would label myself more as a lifestyle influencer, content creator. But I also look at this time as a very in between time for me. I think I felt very lost. I wasn't really sure what the next step was, both in terms of my brand and business and my outward presence. So I was very lucky to kind of on a whim hire a business coach at the end of
Mm.
2019 who was sort of in my orbit for a while, and I was like, I need help, but I don't know what. And she changed my life. So I credit so much of my current state to her. And what I worked on with her was pivoting into the world of social media coaching and education. And I initially did that with a high ticket group coaching program, which I look back on that now and I'm like, wow, that took a lot of courage, or maybe it took some balls
S-
to not
Business
never.
owners have to be a little bit delusional. You can't tell me
Yeah.
otherwise. I think the people that enter this world, you have to have a certain level of being Delu.
Yes, I think that's the best way to describe it. Actually, it was a little
Yeah.
delulu at the time.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really, of course I had about 5 years experience of social media and building what I built. So I wasn't a total noob. I just hadn't helped anyone else yet. But I created the Social Media Saloon. It was my group coaching program. I ended up running it for 3 years, 7 cohorts, had probably at least 250 people throughout those 7 cohorts. But that is what kicked me off into what I do now. And interestingly enough, it ended up coinciding with COVID. So I
Yeah.
launched the very first cohort February 1st, 2020. And so by the time I got to my second cohort that summer, we're in the midst of lockdown and being at home. And so interestingly enough, in addition to developing my coaching with my students, what happened was because I was leading all of these calls within my program and sharing that on stories, people started to see, oh, Jera's coaching, Jera's teaching. I started to get invited into other people's group coaching programs. I was speaking in virtual conferences. And that's the other leg of my business that started to blossom, was the more speaking side. Started off virtually. And now if we fast forward, it also includes in person as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think I was in the first, I may have been the first
Oh, I don't
cohort
think so.
or
I
one
feel
of
like you
the,
were in the fifth.
maybe. This is
Yeah.
my brain just doesn't,
Yeah.
doesn't
I'm gonna look.
translate.
I think it's the fifth. I'll
Something like
check.
that. But I think what I really like that you're doing is this the world that a lot of people enter when they're entrepreneurs, right? Like we all have a certain skill set, and a lot of times it's not social. And we've talked about this too, just as we have chatted, that it's very overwhelming for a lot of people that maybe don't have the most creative brain or background. Their business is like a financial services business, and they're like, I don't know how to post on social. But when you're an entrepreneur, a lot of times it's you. And
Yeah.
so trying to figure out how to get the idea out of your brain
Mm.
into the internet can be really overwhelming. So, how are you working now with individuals, groups, students in trying to translate this massive middle ground of like, a lot of people don't even know where, like, how to get the idea, and then
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
get that into the interwebs. Like, that is a lot that happens in between there.
It is. How much time? Do we have a couple
Yeah.
hours to
Yeah.
No, but I mean, like what you bring up is essentially like the pinnacle of what we're dealing with in a high level for every single person wanting to show up on social media. There's so many facets to it, and that's why it's so challenging. We have everything from simply coming up with the ideas that are more evergreen. It's also understanding short form video content culture, understanding trends and themes and sort of pop culture within short form video content, which exists a little bit more on TikTok, I would say. It's also on camera presence, and a lot of people struggle with that. There's a fear, they feel awkward. There's things that are technical, like the editing of it. And
Yeah.
then, of course, just posting and engaging and being social. So it's hard. It's hard. And I think people sometimes write social media off as, oh, it's easy, it's just social media. But then when you insert yourself into it, it can be a little bit of a reality check with all the bits and pieces and moving parts that are involved, everything ranging from technical to strategy to like confidence. So it's like all the areas of life converging together.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
one place that I like to start, and there's not necessarily one right or wrong or black and white way to go about things, but I find this is just grounding for creating a high level overview of the different ways you should be showing up, or more so the different themes that you should be presenting on social media to create a well rounded strategy. And I call it the content pillar trifecta. And there's three types. So we have your expertise, we have business, and we have secret sauce. Now, within this, we can dissect these into more specific things, but imagine these almost as like lenses through which you can then create more specific content ideas. So, for example, expertise is where you are sharing value, knowledge, insights, resources. And this can range for people. Someone might have their expertise pillars and they might be really heavy in the how to's and the tips and the tutorials. Whereas someone else, maybe how to's and tips and tutorials and resource lists don't really make sense for their business and brand. So for them, their expertise pillar might actually be more of thought leadership and sharing their sort of professional opinions and like insights and the way that they look at things, more of that like authority building content. So all of these are very, or especially the expertise is very flexible in how you can show up. So that's expertise. Then we move on to business, which is so important because if you are a service-based business, if you're a product-based business, if you are not talking about your business, then you just have a hobby of showing up on
Yeah.
social media. You're not actually using it
Yeah.
strategically. And then within that, I like to separate it into hard selling and soft selling.
Mhm.
Hard selling is it's the most like black and white part of what I teach. Everything else has like a lot of gray area. Hard selling is simply presenting what it is that you do, how to work with me. Here's a sale with a promo code. Sign up now, submit this application, purchase so it has a CTA. So it's a very clear action you're asking people to take. Whereas soft selling is a much more subtle, generating awareness type of approach where you can share your schedule and your stories for the day. And it's like, taking my dog for a walk, I'm picking up my kids from work, I have a client call, hint, hint, I have clients, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Sharing testimonials, which is other people's words, sharing behind the scenes, that type of stuff. So that's the business. And then lastly, which is very relevant because we've already mentioned authenticity a bit, are the secret sauce pillars. And I break this up into 4 different categories. I have a whole framework for it, but it essentially makes showing up authentically more tangible and therefore more actionable. So if you think about those 3, expertise, business, and secret sauce, you're sharing your value, you're sharing your business, and also you're sharing yourself.
Yeah. Do you find that that's a big disconnect that people don't realize that they are also selling themselves? And I mean, some businesses maybe, maybe not, but like in a service-based industry, especially, that was a big pivot for me where I'm like, oh, I'm also selling me. Like, yes, it's the service or whatever I'm offering, but like I'm also selling myself. Is that something that
Yeah,
people struggle with?
I do. I think I see it less as them selling themselves, but I think that's right. I think I just maybe haven't thought about it in that way before. I think the way I think about it is like showing up and sharing their personality and sharing their energy and their voice, like their actual voice.
Yeah.
That's, I think, something that people struggle with. And in a way, that is selling yourself. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah. Cause I always, I don't know, maybe I feel like we're kind of similar. It was like talks too much on her report card. So I literally have never once, I was a performer growing up. So I'm like cool behind the camera, but I can get how that's very intimidating, especially if that's not the way that you've been operating. So the authenticity piece, which I also just admire you so much because you are someone that lets it all out there, right? You're armpit farting on stories, you're eating cheese, you're like sharing some of the really hilarious things like your dogs like interrupting the background of your stories.
Yeah.
Was this always something that you felt comfortable with, or has this been a skill that you've also had to develop? Because I think with also showing yourself, especially as you've grown an online presence, comes with opinions and criticism and people maybe not always receiving it. So has this been something that you've always really just felt comfortable with? What's been your journey of showing up as you?
I think I'm a bit lucky. I don't love that word, but I think I'm a bit lucky in some sense because I really see the way that I have developed on social media very much coinciding with like the real-time development of social media. Back in 2015, it was just photos and captions, and then 15-second videos became an option. Then stories became an option, and then reels. So like I take part in those things as they become available over the last 10 years or so, compared to someone who jumps into it, maybe a year ago. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's reels and TikToks and broadcast channels and threads and all of these things. Plus, as you are bringing up in your question, not just the different formats and features, but then also actually showing you and your
Yeah.
personality and behind the scenes through all of that as well. So I think it's been easier for me because I've like grown with the development of social media. And I think it does feel, for the most part, easy to be me, as in like kind of showing that. I don't think I ever really second guess that too much, which I do think is a strength of mine, because I do know a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
I'm also just like a very silly, wacky, goofy person and like to share that. So that's very easy for me to express on social media. That being said, I mean, I have very thin skin. I
Mm,
really wish I didn't, but when someone says, and I don't get it too much, but there are very specific things I can remember still over the years of things that people have said to me that have really stuck with me and hurt. And it's also interesting as well because you are constantly open for interpretation for other
yeah.
people. So regardless of your intention, or people are going to interpret that in some way. And so I remember very specifically, this was, gosh, maybe 4 years ago at this point, fairly early on in my days of pivoting into what I do now, which not everyone was super happy with. And I got one message, I think it might have been the same day or perhaps within the same week, from one person basically saying how inauthentic I am now and how I used to be one way and now I'm this way, as well as a message from someone thanking me so much
Right.
for my authenticity and what I share. So it just goes to show that there's always going to be interpretation, and there can be such a range as well. We can't control it. So why allow the potential or even the real perception of us dictate our next move when it can just be interpreted in any way? I'd rather show up in the way that I am, in the way that I want, regardless of how someone's going to think, rather than keeping myself small because they might think or say something about me.
Right. But then you'd get someone on the flip side that is like, you're not showing and you're bland, you're boring, you're not showing anything. And it's so true. And I think an interesting thing that I've experienced is that I've done some pivoting and things have gotten kind of crazy is people drop off and changing the mindset around that of like the right people are still here.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
a big thing I think too, if I'd be interested to hear your perspective on as you work with clients, people, individuals of getting people to change how they think about their following, their likes, and that's changed so much too. Algorithms, I can't keep up. Like, can anyone really always keep up? It's long gone are the days where you put the sepia filter on and you post a picture
Oh,
of a hot dog at a baseball game and it gets like 4,000 likes, right?
that
Like
was
that's just
fun.
it was fun, but that's just not how it works anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
And so with this, like pairing into the authenticity and showing up and being yourself, how do you work through and help others work through the fact that not everyone's going to like it? And we have to focus on the mindset of the right people stay, the wrong people
Yeah.
leave, which is what it should be.
Yes. Oh, I have so many thoughts on this. I have like 10 different things firing off in my head. The first thing, which feels very tangible, is that I've had a client for about 6 months now, and she when we first started working together, she'd kind of dropped off the radar of social media and hadn't been really showing up very inconsistently, not really showing her personality that much. And so that's what we were working on as a strategy to support her business. Because once again, we're not just showing up to show up, there's a bigger vision, there's a North Star, there's a reason why we're doing this. And I remember the first like month or two, she started losing followers and it was so painful for her.
Yep.
And I was like, listen, we gotta, oh wait, I feel like it's take two steps forward and one back. Yeah, there we go. It's kind of that mindset of sometimes it's not just a linear process, especially when you're changing up something about how you're
Yes.
showing up. Maybe it's more talking to camera that you're incorporating. Maybe you are showing more behind the scenes of your life versus only showing your business. And we have to keep the bigger vision in mind rather than playing to the algorithm or perhaps playing to an audience that was for our old version or an older version. We have to kind of take the short term hit in order to work towards that larger goal or larger vision. And once again, like I said, I have so many thoughts about this, but the other thing I wanted to make sure that I said was sometimes I really believe this, sometimes our most impactful content or most important content is our least performing content.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
oftentimes is because think about it, like usually the stuff that goes viral, not all of it, but a large portion is the stuff that's very quick hitting. It's like a relatable thing. It's something funny. It's something silly. It's something shocking. It's something that a lot of people can consume and sort of understand right away. Versus if we're creating a really valuable piece of content with information or something vulnerable about our story, that's intended for a very specific audience to
Yeah.
benefit from. It's not sort of mass appeal for the most part. And that can often be because of that, our lowest performing content. But just because something doesn't perform well doesn't mean it wasn't a good piece of content. Like I hate on threads, I see all the time people saying like it's not the algorithm, it's your content that sucks. And I feel like that perpetuates the message that if a piece of content doesn't have high views or high engagement, it automatically means it sucks. Like I just do not vibe or agree with that at all
Yeah.
because there can be such a range in engagement when it comes to the different types of content that we're sharing.
Yeah. I think I feel like I might get the quote while my dad's like, if you're talking to everyone, you're talking to no one.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not a bad thing to have pieces, maybe a more evergreen, piece or sharing something. Like obviously the most high performing post I think ever is like the day I announced my son was born, right? Like of course,
Yeah,
everyone
it's like
can
a universal feeling.
right. Or then
Yeah.
randomly, sometimes I'm like, why the hell did this go viral? Nobody knows. I don't even think Instagram knows. That's fine. It can go viral. But like an interesting thing that happens there is then sometimes you get all these followers that like actually want nothing to do with you because that's
Yeah.
the post that ended up going viral. And so I think that's everyone's pipe dream is like, I just want to go viral a bunch of times. And it's like, well, first off, the comment section can just be an absolute
Oh,
bloodbath, terrifying.
yeah.
And also the niche down content, again, if that's getting in front of the right 10 eyeballs that will convert, I would much rather get 10 likes from the 10 right people than a viral post about something so random that's never going to actually convert to anything.
Absolutely. I think more and more people are realizing that it's not necessarily the follower count, it's not necessarily the engagement you're getting on each individual post, but it's more about curating the right audience who are interested in you, interested in what you sell, because numbers mean nothing if they're not actually going to convert. And convert can mean a lot of things, whether they are attending your events or purchasing your products or services or whatever it may be. So I'm fully in agreement on that.
Yeah, it feels like the Wild West over there sometimes. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
loved what you were saying that you've grown with the platform because I even get overwhelmed where I'm like, I went live the other day for the first time in a long time. I was like, I have to get out of my comfort zone here because I
Yeah.
can't just keep doing the same things. But like if someone like my mom has no zero, has never signed up for a social media website. Can you imagine first
Oh
and
my
foremost? And I'm like,
God.
don't, because I feel like you would get an Instagram and your phone would implode. Like you would
Yeah.
implode. I think
Yeah.
you would be so overwhelmed. buy it.
Yes.
Just don't. Uh, but let's dive into actually creating the content now, because this is
Mm,
something that I struggle with. And it's interesting. I am a creative person. We've talked about this. The ideas flow abundantly. Like I could
right.
write journals of that. With what you're doing now, the video editing rodeo, correct, is
Correct.
now diving into the world of actually creation, creating pieces of content and
Right.
finding more confidence with that. So, what is that looking like? What is that type of service? And how are you helping people actually do the creation piece now? Because that's a huge gap. I feel like it's a
Yeah.
big gap in the market.
It is, it is, and before talking about the rodeo, I just wanna give a little bit of advice of kind of a high level way to think about it because it's a huge struggle. People either don't have ideas and then they need to generate the ideas and then
Right.
figure out how to bring that to life, or people have lots of ideas, but then how do you bring that to life and how do you social mediaify it? And this doesn't solve everything, but I think a really great place to start is understanding that you can have an idea and then from that, there are multiple different ways in which that idea can come to life. And just having a high level understanding of that is a grounding place to start. So,
Yeah.
for example, let's say my content idea is how to build community. Very general, but we'll just start with that.
Yeah.
And that idea can come to life by me talking to camera. It can just be a talking head video. It could be B roll with voiceover. Maybe I have B-roll from an event that I was at, and there's lots of people there, and shots of me speaking with people and kind of showing my phone. I'm thinking of this one event that I have all this B-roll from, and then adding voiceover underneath that to explain the content idea and bring it to life. Then we have B-roll with text overlay. So it's the text that is conveying the message compared to in the first two examples, your voice is really the one that is conveying the message. Those are the main three, but then we also have trends. So if
Yeah.
there's a million different types of trends, but when it comes to hopping on a trend, jumping on a trend, the structure, the format is there, but you have to apply yourself to it. So that's where the content idea comes to life. Can you take the format, the skeleton of this idea, which is the trend, and then take a content idea and apply it to that? Then there's things like transitions and like character videos, but we're getting like a little bit more specific and niche
Yeah.
there. So those are the main ones. And what's oh, and there's also non-video as well. So carousels, for example. So I think understanding that's really helpful and really diving into figuring out what are your like green lights, yellow lights, and red lights with those types of formats. And I like to think of the green, yellow, and red lights in combination of what do you like to create as well as what's easier or harder to
Mhm.
create. So, for example, someone might say like transitions, like no, and like trends, like that's not my vibe. So we would put that probably into a red light versus B-roll with text overlay. That's for most people probably going to be one of the easiest formats. So that would be a green light. But for most people, I'm going to encourage most people listening to this. I think it's really important to incorporate your voice and talk to camera, but that might be something that's a little bit of a higher effort. So that might be more of a yellow light where, yeah, we want to do it, but it might not be the thing that we resort to every single time. So understanding those different types of formats, and then from there, understanding what is an easier lift, what's a heavier lift, what do I enjoy doing, what do I hate doing, or what is something that just like doesn't make sense for my brand. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to lay that all out there first.
Is the
Uh,
event, now I'm just going to plug you quick, is the event from the Reelies where you won 5 Really awards? Was it last weekend?
It was, yeah, today, yeah, yeah, not even a week ago at this
Yes, Jera won not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4,
point.
but 5 awards at the Reelies this past, which just congratulations.
Thank
So if you
you.
have B-roll from that event, you got to use it, right? Because
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and there's so many ways to repurpose that. So I just was looking
right.
at one, I got Manu, who's the founder of the Reelies, just sent me a really cute video of us kind of dancing and like taking a selfie together. And that could be something that I add voiceover to, that could be something that I add text to, that could be one single shot, like the reel is just one single shot, or I could use that and incorporate that into a montage with other
Yep.
shots as well. So not only are we talking about taking one idea and then bringing it to life via different formats, but we can also talk about here's a video clip. What are the different ways we can use this one single video clip as well?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so as a creator, are you always thinking of things in the lens of like, can this be content? That's actually more just a curiosity I have. Like, if you're out and about, are you like, ooh, like this could be
Uh,
content?
Honestly, if I compare to my influencer days, like 2015 to like 2019, those were like the heaviest years of influencer Jera. Nothing compared to those years. And
Yeah.
it's honestly such a relief because I used to, if I was on a personal trip, like just a vacation, I was always thinking like, okay, I need to find the photo spots, like wake up early, go before the crowds are there, pack outfits, and make sure I'm taking advantage. But my eyes were always out and I'm Googling Insta-worthy spots. And now because it's well, one, I do feel like video is a lot different than when we were photos and captions, where we did, for the most part, have to emphasize the aesthetic a bit more. But also now with my pivot into what I do now, more in the education and coaching space, the cool environments or the different activities are less relevant. So in a way,
Yeah.
I actually don't think everything is content at all. I feel like I almost never
Amazing.
am thinking about that if I'm honest, which is great. I love that.
Which I think is very important that you're teaching this now too, because people, at least like for me, it's like a struggle of like, I want to be present when I'm in certain scenarios, the phone goes down, but then it's like, ooh, I completely forgot to like document anything from that. Like,
Yeah.
oops. But what I
Yeah.
think is important is making this feel less stressful and overwhelming, or maybe intimidating. If someone's never entered the world of content creation, that may be their first thought of like, do I always have to be filming something or out and like finding something and taking a photo or taking a video and making sure I have all of this stuff? So is that something that you walk through in the rodeo as well, of like almost how to like batch it and like get stuff that then can be used in a numerous amount of ways? Is that something you walk through?
Super good question. So the video editing rodeo is I'll give my little intro into the
Yeah.
course. Comprehensive self-paced course that teaches the essential skills of short form video content editing so that you can create better videos in half the time. I find those to be the two biggest pain points of
Yes.
I'm just overwhelmed with editing and I don't know how, or maybe I have some skills, but I don't have all the skills. Plus, how long it takes. Those are the two big things that the course tackles. And we start from absolute beginner to pretty advanced. So if you've never edited before, the whole course is also based in CapCut. So if you've never been in CapCut before, we start from absolute square one, but we have editing 101 all the way to editing 106. So if you do
Okay.
have more experience and you're like, I need to, jump into some more advanced things, we end with things like keyframes and layer masks and some pretty advanced animations and transitions and all that. So on that note, with the video editing
Real.
rodeo, or the rodeo for short, the primary focus is on editing. I wanted to
Yeah.
be as specific as possible. So I do tell people, if you are looking for how to film and really wanting to learn like how to batch and like how to get certain angles, this course doesn't really include that. It's more about after the fact
Yeah.
once you have the footage. However, my one sort of caveat to that, which people have told me has been like one of their favorite parts actually, is that at the end of every 101, 102, 103, I have a module that's called Make It With Me. And in Make It With Me is where I recreate videos from scratch. So everything that you learned in editing 102, for example, where we learn about the multiple tracks in your timeline, voiceover, adding sound effects, layering overlays, all that kind of stuff. You then see like anywhere between 5 to 10 different videos come to life using those skills and techniques. Included in that, I pretty much always show my raw footage. So one of the things that people really respond to is with the talking to camera videos that are in editing 101, you will see what I look like when I'm recording myself. And I just hit record, I let it run, and it looks freaking awkward as heck because I'll like think of my next line or I'm practicing my next line if I have it written down, and you'll see me kind of like mouth the words, and you'll see me kind of pause and like awkwardly touch my hair. And then I say the line and I mess up and I say it again. So it does give you some insight into ways that I record different videos, whether
Yeah.
it's talking to camera or vlogs, or I give a whole behind the scenes with all different types of transitions. So you will see that in the Make It With Me's, but it isn't specifically focused on the filming, the batching, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I still think that that's wildly important as well, because I even catch myself in this where I need to get more comfortable on, even if the raw footage is 10 minutes long and I end up only using a piece of it, I tend to be like, no, stop, re-record, delete, if I mess up, or if I need to get more comfortable with,
Interesting.
yeah, that may be like some deep-rooted perfectionism tendencies in there that I should
Yeah, yeah,
still be working on in
sure.
therapy, most likely. But um like that is, I love that you show like full to cut to this, because I also think the editing piece is huge. And first, there's just so much out there, which is great. Like, I love that there's so many options to edit and use, and apps and this, things that are trying to make people's lives easier. But then you can also be like, there's 37 apps I can choose from. I have no idea what the hell to do here.
Exactly. And that's the crazy thing, because we're talking about all these other elements of, fear of showing up on camera and what are my ideas, but now we're in the technical nature of it, and that's just a whole other part. Like, having the idea is half the battle, and then the rest of the battle is actually bringing it to life. So if you're someone who has great ideas and maybe you're even decent at filming, you're comfortable with that, but if you don't know the tools and the techniques and the different methods for editing that, you could have something amazing to share, but it's not optimized or edited in the way that makes sense for social media, and it might fall flat. So you have the technical aspect of like which apps to use. Also, you can edit within Instagram and TikTok, which is really confusing. I
Yeah.
don't recommend that. I think editing in CapCut 9 times out of 10 is the best way to go, but it's a mix of knowing the apps. I recommend CapCut, understanding the tools within the apps, and then actually knowing the techniques of how to use those tools in the right way to create better videos, but then also to save you time as well.
Yeah. That's definitely where I get caught up. And this is something that layers in just from working with you, being in some of your programs and knowing you. How do you also chat with people and provide insights and intel on doing it imperfectly? So I struggle with this too. I'm like, but it doesn't look quite right. But I'm also not a professional videographer or editor. Like, that is not what I went to school for. Right. And
Mhm.
so, what's this balance between getting comfortable enough with tools and systems, and to a point where you're like, I feel good about this, but also letting go a little bit of it having to be like studio quality,
Yeah,
professionally edited content. So, like, that's, I
right.
think, an authenticity thing too, of like, I want it to look professional enough because this is my business, but also like, I have to let go a little bit of it being perfect.
Right, right. Well, one thing that comes to mind is that video, even though its entrance into social media has complicated things a bit, because video is more complicated than a
Yeah.
photo and a caption. Well, there's lots of bright sides of this, but a big bright side is that it has also opened the door for social media to be a less perfect place. So prior to Reels and prior to TikTok, we're all worried about our grids and the aesthetics of our photos. And sure, some people are still worried about that, but it has really lessened, both in terms of the actual aesthetic nature and the content. So I think it's not quite as like highlight reel and trying to make everything look perfect. And it's also allowed us to pull the curtain back on who we are as humans, because video allows us to convey that more. So I think really just settling into that concept first is really important.
Yeah.
And also realizing that if you do want to make better content, you have to make kind of worse content first.
Yeah.
I don't
The
want to I don't want
cringe
to say like
stuff.
yeah, yeah, I don't want to say like worse or bad, but something that I tell my clients is you have to get comfortable with making like C-level content if you want to get to B level, if you want to get to A level. Now, you might not even need to get to A level, like B level might be perfectly fine for the
Yeah.
reasons that I just explained around how things have changed. But I think it's so interesting how social media is so different when it comes to people's expectations compared to other niches or businesses. Like if you were learning a new language, would you expect yourself after a couple classes to be fluent? Like, no, it would take time. Your accent wouldn't be great. You'd be getting words wrong. You'd be learning new vocabulary. If you went to a painting class, do you expect your first painting class to be great? Any skill, anything like that. But on social media, we expect us to be perfect in the
Right.
way we present ourselves, or we have a need and desire to represent ourselves in this perfect way. And we also, which is another conversation, have this expectation of like such quick results as well. Like, oh, this didn't do well, so I suck, or I should be growing faster. Where once again, if you think about other skills and industries, no one would ever have that expectation. So I think it's about embracing the suck and trudging through the mud a little bit in those beginning days. Or maybe it's not even beginning. Maybe you've been doing this for a while and it just takes even more time and practice.
Yeah.
But that's the mindset to embrace. And the last thing I'll say, because I remember saying this to my client recently, who was really just overdoing this one particular video. I'm like, okay, let's say this video is at its, I don't know, it's 70% of how you would want it to be. I don't think that spending hours and hours and hours on that final 30% is going to equate to like the extra result you would get by working on that, if that makes sense. So it's like if we're
Yeah.
just going, spending so much time just dissecting these final bits, I don't think it's going to pay off in the way that we want. The better payoff is post that whatever 70% C-level video and then take the time to then make something else so that you're, posting more consistently, really getting the reps in, and that's how you're going to get better.
Yeah. Better done than perfect. And
Yeah.
obviously there's certain things in life we probably shouldn't apply that to, but I think social is interesting too. And maybe this is an our generation thing since we grew up like this. Like this is now something that we've pretty much always had. I mean, we were super young when, computers and whatnot came on the scene. And it's been
Yeah.
really interesting for me to also, because I have much younger siblings. My little sister's 23, my brother's 25, to also watch how they interact
Yeah.
on the internet has been really fascinating. And so I think it's really important with the stuff that you're teaching is it's almost like skills you can use to continue to apply as things evolve and
Yeah.
change
Yeah.
because it's a living,
Absolutely.
breathing thing, right? So I think it's really important to also know that with time, things will change and that might be uncomfortable, but you need to equip yourself with at least the tools and the knowledge to keep up with that. Cause I think that's a struggle too, is like trying on the hamster wheel, trying to keep up with like what they just announced. What's next? What's this? What's that? Like it can feel really overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think actually that's a great thing to bring up because people do get so overwhelmed with all the updates. And, I scroll through and I see these posts. The algorithm has changed. What you need to know. It's like, the algorithm is constantly changing. Like
Right.
we as humans train the algorithm. So yeah, it's always changing, but it's not like, okay, at 12:01 it was this and at 12:02 now it's this. It's total clickbait. And I understand how people who are not in the world of social media but trying to understand get really caught up in that and it feels so confusing. You're trying to understand the latest tactics and the algorithm. My approach, I would say, for the most part, is not ignoring those things, but really grounding yourself in the things that don't necessarily change or are much slower to change.
Yeah.
So, for example, those pillars I was talking about, expertise, business, secret sauce, that is something that's going to stay at least for the next couple years, regardless of the trends and the features. Showing up authentically, creating evergreen content ideas that really support your business and your goals, video editing, like all of these things are foundational ways to ground yourself. And if you really, I think, immerse yourself in those more foundational things, you are going to just feel so much more, not like fully peaceful, like, but a lot more peaceful, I think,
Yeah.
when you start to not let the tactics and the, things that people are saying to create clickbait just totally infiltrate your mind and really overwhelm you.
Yeah, I'm so sick of hearing and it's way all over threads like the algorithm's out
Oh
to
my
get
God.
me. I'm like, I don't think it knows who you are, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And of course, I have stuff that does great, stuff that maybe doesn't. I it's interesting because I come from such a heavy data analytics background. Like I do look at it and see, are there certain maybe times. I don't live and die by any of that though,
Yeah.
because I also want to show up when I feel like I am able to show up.
Yeah.
Do you have any, and this does not have to be like will or will not definitely happen, any inklings of like what will be coming out or more of a focus in the next 3 years?
I like truthfully, I feel like I always struggle with a question like this. I'm like, I don't know. I'm
'Cause
just in the
yeah,
moment now.
yeah, yeah,
I feel like I'm not good at predicting things. I mean, I do feel in general that people are starting to get tired of like the trend. I mean, it is actually really interesting to see how trends have evolved, like on Instagram specifically,
yep,
since 2020. Because first we had like the lip dubs, and that was so big, and now that's not really as big of a thing, but it's more of just like the trending audios and the B-roll with the quick text. But more and more, I think people are getting very tired of that. It's for the most part a little bit surface level. So I'm not really sure where like features and how platforms are going to change, but I do think, and I certainly hope that things are going to start to be even more based in personality and perspective and like authenticity and like our humanness versus just the quick flashy
yeah,
trends. So let's see, but I think it is starting to perhaps trend in that direction a little bit.
yeah. There's those trends that I'm like, if I have to hear this sound one more time, I'm gonna throw my phone in the pool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I
Uh-huh.
love her, like the very demure, very cutesy. I'm like, I cannot. This is not demure anymore. The demure is
Yeah.
not demure. So I try. Sometimes I'll hop on them, but sometimes I'm just like, this is so
I feel you.
overdone, and
And
like,
I think because people understand trend culture even
yeah,
more now than they did a few years ago, and brands understand it more, to me and I've seen the trend cycle is faster. So like very demure, very mindful. To me, you had like a 3-day, maybe 5-day window to really hop on that before it did start to get annoying. Cause yeah,
right.
same. I'm like, and then I saw a few and I'm like, this is over. Like we got to move past this.
We got to keep going. That's like the quick
Yeah.
stuff. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you aim and do want to build foundational success, both in the form of how you show up, how you want to represent your brand, and foundations of actually the creation. So, where can people find you to find both the rodeo, work with you one on one, find your coaching? Where can everyone find you?
Well, you can always find me on social media,
Yes.
Jera.bean on Instagram and TikTok. You can go to my link in bio of my stand store so you can see actually a new product I just created called the Authentic Personal Brand Blueprint. It's actually my first low ticket offer. I'm very
Oh my
excited about
gosh.
it. And the video editing rodeo is also linked there, but you can also go to jerabean.com/, the video editing rodeo. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can join my newsletter, all the good stuff.
There's so many, and I'll tag it all obviously in the show notes and wherever you find this podcast. But Jera, you just are a light of
Thank
beautifulness,
you.
authenticity. I have loved. I mean, I feel like I've been following you for. I think you were in fitness, like quite literally in your
Oh my
fitness days. So
gosh.
I've been
I
around
love
for a
that.
while.
I love that.
Also follow her because she has exceptional dog content.
Yes.
She
Agreed.
has the cutest, I mean, 10 out of 10 on the dog content. And I also enjoy Aaron's commentary here and there as he
When he
shows
makes an appearance. It's rare, but it's always, like, potent when he does.
up. It's so funny because Duke refuses to be on my podcast. He's like, I am so socially awkward. I can't like, and I get it. He is very rarely shown, featured, has never once spoken. I don't think people know what his voice sounds like
So funny.
because he's just not like that. He's like,
Yeah.
what you do is my nightmare, my
Mm.
living nightmare, because he's
Yeah.
very introverted, analytical, like behind four computer screens on Excel all day. And that's floats his boat. I'm like, let that blow your hair back, bud. But I've been like, will you come on the show? And he's like, absolutely not. Hard pass.
Hey, I feel like a lot of us are like, we have a partner or husband or wife who's the complete opposite on social media, and I think,
Yeah.
that works. We
And it
just fit
works out.
together.
It
Yeah.
works out. All right. I'm going to tag everything. Jera, thank you. You are the absolute best. Go find Jera. Go find all of her new goodies out. Send her a DM, chit chat with her.
Yes,
We hope
please.
you enjoy this episode. Thank you. Thank you.